Chapter 14. The Shorty. Jiro mastered a lot of games after he entered school. He was good at climbing trees and throwing stones. He could swim like a frog. When he went catching dragonflies or fishing carp or small eels, he always caught the most among his playmates. He would move about barefoot except in water. School life made him wild rather than mild. He seldom reviewed his lessons, and yet his textbooks were dirty and some pages missing. He made much use of them in his fights against other boys on his way back from school. At times he threw them in the air without any reason. Once in a while, Kyoichi and Jiro were made to show the textbooks before their mother. Kyoichi's textbooks were always clean and bright, while Jiro's were nearly worn out, and he was scolded severely each time. If she had not warned him so hard, he might have used them in other ways too. On the other hand, his marks were not so bad. He did not drop below the fifth in his class of 50 boys and girls. There was an exceptionally bright boy named Kenichi. Were it not for him, Jiro might have become the very best at school records. In behavior, however, he was usually marked good, not excellent. Once he was reported not very bad, which made him so embarrassed. He rubbed out the words with his fingers. It was his father, not his mother, who got angry at his cunning trick. Shunsuke hit him on the head with his bamboo pipe. Ohama would serve him with sweet omelets on the report day, but each time she looked displeased. Kyo-chan is always at the top in his class. What's this report of yours? She would say. Jiro had to listen to the same complaint after the sweet omelets. At first, he felt sorry for her for his results, but her persistent expression of dissatisfaction became annoying to him. By and by, he would not visit her as often as before. There were some other reasons for his keeping away from her old nurse. In those days, his life was made up with 3 categories. The first was one dominated by his mother and grandmother. The second was one surrounded by Ohama, his father, and the Masakis. And the last was the one fashioned by himself, which was full of a free and fresh atmosphere. It was in the third world that he could spend his time to his heart's content. It was a world composed of his friends and naturally most attractive, though he liked the second very much. In the next spring, Jiro was moved up to the 2nd grade of his school. Every day was filled with a lot of things to do. The busier his life was, the happier he became in the third world of his. At times, he indulged in his merrymaking too much and came home too late when he had to be repaid by unfortunate treatment. Isn't it common to keep a child away from supper as a punishment when he comes home very late? When he became the 3rd grader, however, an unhappy situation arose to make a crack in his paradise. It was because Shunzo, his little brother, entered the same school. When she came back from the entrance ceremony, Otami called Kyoichi and Jiro and solemnly told them the episode of the famous warrior Mori Motonari, who made his 3 sons break a bundle of arrows in order to teach them how important it was to be united together. Now you understand, I suppose. You three brothers must go to school all together. Shunzo is just a first grader, so both of you should take good care of him. However, it did not seem very important to Jiro. It would be to Kyoichi's job. It would be Kyoichi's job, Jiro thought. How was it when I entered school? I don't remember a day when I was taken care of by Kyoichi, he said to himself, looking out of the window. Jiro, where are you looking? She cried. Do you understand what I told you? You're the nearest brother, so you must look after him more than Kyoichi. What she was saying seemed strange to Jiro. What's more than Kyoichi? Was he the nearest brother? How inconsistent she is, he thought. Besides, Kyoichi is in the 5th grade, she went on. He sometimes has to take lessons at school late in the afternoon, so you have to come back with Shunzo as soon as school is over. Understand? Jiro thought his mother was all the more inconsistent and that he should be very careful not to be involved with his younger brother. But mother, I must go home later than Shunzo, he said. His lessons will be over in the morning. It was a nice excuse, he thought, of impromptu, which Otami could not see through. I know that, she said, so I've asked Naokichi to meet him as often as possible, but he's busy, as you know, so if he cannot come for Shunzo, you must bring him home. I've already asked Ohama to take care of him at her house till you drop in. Till he drops in. It was a dead end for him, though he said to himself, wasn't it my mother that strictly forbade me to drop in at her house? But he dared not point out his mother's inconsistency. If he did so, he would be making all the more trouble for himself. In this way, Jiro began to go to school with Shunzo. Naokichi, who was expected to meet his brother, never came. Jiro's free world was shattered to pieces. He went to school and came home with Shunzo very punctually. Then he had to review his lessons or was asked to do some work or sent on errands. He was really disheartened and miserable, while Otami was fully satisfied with the result of her intention. Going to school with Shunzo caused another trouble for Jiro. He was born small and did not grow as tall as other boys of his age, probably because of his constitution. Maybe it was caused by food or his hot temper. He did gain weight and a healthy color after he entered school, but in height he was shorter than any other student in his class. In an athletic class, he was always lined up at the tail end of his height. For his height. When the three brothers lined up with Kyoichi in the center, everybody said, smiling, that it was like the famous picture of the Crown Prince Shotoku and his two sons. Jiro was as tall as his younger brother. As a result, his clothes were often cut out the same length as Shunzo's, and besides, they were usually the same splashed patterned clothes from the same cloth. It sometimes brought about fighting between them, but Otami and grandmother did not have to worry at all because they could settle their conflict easily by ruling that the dirtier and ripped ones belonged to Jiro. Their decisions were not always correct, but they believed it better to be so. It would give him some lesson, they thought. Jiro could endure their unfair judgment but nothing was so humiliating for him to go to school and back with Shunzo every day. He had long felt ashamed of his short height. When he went by himself, he was not so miserable, but the thought of going to school with his brother made him shrink in shame. He felt as if he had been dragged out to the public for entertainment at the circus. The village women were quite mindless of his serious trouble. "How intimate they are," they said merrily. "I can't tell which is which." There was nothing more insulting than these words for him. "How can I be on good terms with Shunzo?" he protested in his mind. He held his head straight and walked on tiptoes as often as possible. When he passed by a house with glass windows, he never failed to stop in order to have a look at his posture. This pathetic effort of his, however, did not work in bringing back his confidence. His last decision was to keep away from his brother as much as possible. But that was not an easy work, for Shunzo was timid and always clinging to him once he left his house, though he was selfish and swollen-headed at home. If he was kept away just a few meters, he would cry out, stamping on the ground. For the first week or so, Jiro kept his promise faithfully, even if his posture reflected in the glass windows made him feel distressed. The reflected image was always sneering at him, he thought. In the meantime, the call of his third world was really growing hard for him to resist. At last, one day, on his way back from school, he left his crying brother behind and went to play with his friends. "Father won't hit me for such a reason," he said to himself, but felt guilty for what he had done to Shunzo. So he went back to the Masakis and attended school from there for several days. Chapter 15. The Young Rooster. One day, Jiro was sitting alone on a rock in the Masaki's garden and was looking at the artificial mound where several chickens were digging the earth for food. There were two cocks among them. One was a white rooster he knew well because it had been kept there for a few years. The other was young, just 1 year old or so, whose body was covered with soft yellowish-brown feathers. It looked vigorous but was standing by himself away from the other chickens. Once in a while, the young one extended his head, looked around, and carefully started for the group, but each time he was driven back by the old rooster. The young cock sometimes ruffled up his feathers in protest, but was not yet courageous enough to fight back. As he repeated his challenge, the young cock grew braver, and now he was straightening the plumage round his neck against his rival. The scene made Jiro breathe rapidly and feel very irritable. He remembered biting the bit of flesh off Kitaro's knees. If only that young rooster would let himself go, Jiro thought, he would surely beat that old one. He also remembered fighting against his brothers, which made him angry again. When he fought with Kyoichi, his mother and grandmother were sure to say, "Are you going to resist your elder brother?" Then he had to take his hands off. If he fought with Shunzo, they would say, "Why do you raise your hands to your younger brother? Let him win." He couldn't defeat either of them. As soon as he dropped his hands, they would always hit him once or twice before they withdraw. How vexatious it was. His mother and grandmother seemed to make it a rule to draw them apart after they ascertained that Jiro was given a blow or two by his brother. "All right, that's all. Stop it," was what they said in the end. Nothing was more provoking than these was. His eyes glared like the fire in the furnace, and tears as cold as ice welled up in them. "Can my younger brother go to school by himself? No. Can Kyoichi, my elder brother, speak a word in the company of Kitaro? No. Why must I play the loser every time? Be hanged with mother and grandmother. If it's bad to resist an elder brother, why don't they stop Shunzo when he did to me? If it's good to give way to a younger brother, why don't they scold Kyoichi when he hits me? They're always inconsistent, mother and grandmother. Whenever I suffer a loss, they grin, but they never look pleased when I do something good. Mother and grandmother sometimes say breeding rather than birth. I don't know what it means. Probably they were abusing Ohama. But I'm sure there's nobody as honest as she. She likes what I like, and I like what she likes. I don't mind being at the top in my class, but just a bit bothering. What in the world are they going to make of me? When I'm at home, they sometimes say how easy they feel without me. That's the reason why I come to the Masakis at times. In spite of this, they ask me why I make them worry so much. Don't I know how anxious they are about me? No kidding. Whenever I come home, they never fail to scold me. Don't worry about me, please. I already know what they think of me, so I'm keeping away from home as much as I can. My teacher tells us a lot of things at school, but I think half of them are not true. He said that a parent's love is deeper than the sea. Probably it applies to my father, but not so with my mother. Why doesn't he tell of my good nurse? He sees Ohama every day at school, doesn't he? How strange. Following his thought, he had dropped his eyes down to his feet. All of a sudden, a noisy flapping sound was heard. He raised his eyes and saw the young rooster desperately challenging his old enemy. The two cocks were confronting each other a few inches apart, both ruffling up their feathers around their flaming crests. It looked as if a sunflower and a magnolia were trembling with blood in their petals. They started kicking each other. It was exchanged twice, but each time the young one was at a disadvantage. "Hang in there," said Jiro involuntarily, almost rising up. But the young cock dared not retreat from the battlefield. Very soon they collided into each other about 1 foot up from the ground. This time they were evenly matched. Their kicking went on for the 4th, 5th, and 6th times, getting as evenly as ever. Leaning forward, Jiro watched their title match breathlessly, clenching his fists. By and by, the fight became disordered. The jumping, which had been done by both fowls at the same time, was done by turns now. They were attacking each other's crest with their bill. Once the situation turned like that, it was youth that would settle the fight. The warm, old blood of the old cock circulated much more slowly than the fresh blood of the young one, set boiling by his strenuous fighting instinct. The old cock often missed his mark. He gave only one blow while the young one struck his opponent twice. Once in a while he went clumsily under the young rooster's thighs in order to evade his attacks. At last the old cock's confidence collapsed, and he fled tottering to the other side of the mound. His crest was bruised and stained with blood, his bill wide open. The young hero, running after his rival a few steps, stood on top of the mound and flapped his wings proudly. As he looked down at the hens, he uttered a loud crow of victory. Jiro rose to his feet, satisfied. He extended all his limbs and walked to the back of the mound. He saw the old cock standing alone by the fence. He had lost his dominion over the young traitor. On top of the mound, the young rooster gave another shout of triumph. Scratching the earth violently, he crowed loudly to the hens. Jiro felt very heroic himself. Blood, very hot and very cold at the same time, flowed vigorously in his veins. A faint smile crossed his face. That evening, Jiro bade goodbye to the Masakis and went back to the Hondas, his parental house.